Assalamu alaikum. It's Sista Samilah, your favorite voice of truth, clarity, and hard-hitting commentary, right here on AfroWire AI. Family, today we're talking about a shift that's shaking the foundation of every Black community from Harlem to Houston to Hollywood. I'm talking about the great exodus from religion, why Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z have turned their backs on the church, the mosque, the temple, and every institution that claims to have the answers but keeps delivering disappointment. Let's be honest, this topic makes some folks uncomfortable, but I'm not here to coddle comfort. I'm here to speak truth and call it like I see it. These generations are walking away not because they hate God, but because they love the real. They're tired of the fake, fed up with institutions that sold out, and allergic to leaders who talk a big game on Sunday but act scandalous the rest of the week. If you've noticed, the pews are emptier, the youth groups are quieter, and the folks most on fire for justice are rarely in the sanctuary anymore. You're not crazy. Today, we're breaking down why so many are done with church as usual, how religious institutions betrayed the trust of a generation, and what it'll take to make faith matter again. Buckle up, because Sista Samilah is about to dig deep. Before we go in, let's define the crowd we're talking about. Gen X, born roughly between 1965 and 1980, were the latchkey kids, the first MTV generation, the ones who saw the promises of the civil rights movement get watered down and Reaganomics eat up the Black middle class. They watched the Black church become more about political respectability than radical change. Then came the Millennials, born between 1981 and 1996. These are the children of hip hop and the internet. They grew up watching everything, wars, scandals, corporate corruption, unfold live on TV. Millennials asked why the church was stuck in the past, why Sunday was the most segregated day of the week, and why faith leaders seemed more loyal to politicians than the people. And now Gen Z, the digital natives born from 1997 on. They've never known a world without Google, smartphones, or global connection. They are gender nonconforming, anti-authoritarian, and allergic to fake news. They value authenticity above tradition, intersectionality over dogma, and community over hierarchy. If it's not real, if it's not just, and if it's not inclusive, Gen Z will call it out and walk away. No apologies. All three generations have one thing in common. They respect the real, and they have zero tolerance for hypocrisy, manipulation, or performative faith. If you're not living what you preach, you're invisible to them. Let's keep it 100. For generations, Black faith institutions were the backbone of survival and resistance. The church, the mosque, and the temple housed our hopes and strategies, funded our lawsuits, and hid our fugitives. But somewhere along the way, something changed. The sacred space got replaced by the business model. The leader became a brand. The message got traded for the money. Gen X saw the Black church pivot from marching in the streets to building mega churches in the suburbs, partnering with politicians who never delivered. Millennials witnessed sex scandals covered up, offering plates mismanaged, and preachers living lavish while folks in the pews struggled to pay rent. They saw prosperity gospel peddled as truth. Pray hard enough and you'll get that new car, while the system still kept its foot on our necks. Gen Z. They logged on and watched everything. The side chick drama, the pastors flexing designer suits on Instagram, the sheep shamed for asking questions, and the choir directors living double lives while preaching condemnation. They noticed when tithes went to fund a new jet, not a college fund. They saw the pastor's house get bigger while the church roof kept leaking. They watched political candidates use pulpits as campaign stops, then ghost the community once they got elected. And when they saw all that, they started asking the questions the elders were afraid to ask. Why are church leaders sleeping with the congregation? Why are the elders protecting predators? Why does the pastor never talk about reparations or real justice? Why does every solution involve praying and paying, but never organizing or holding the system accountable? This wasn't about rejecting God. This was about rejecting the hypocrisy, the manipulation, and the gaslighting that had become the norm. These generations saw the receipts, checked the fruit, and realized the tree was rotten at the root. Let's talk about the three-headed monster that destroyed faith in faith: scandal, money, and the fall of trust. First, the scandals. Every generation has seen them, but with smartphones and social media, they can't be hidden anymore. From televangelists crying on TV after getting caught with prostitutes, to bishops caught up in financial crimes, to local pastors caught tricking off tithe money on their side chick or church concubine, nothing stays secret for long. The younger generations saw not just the mistakes, but the cover-ups. Elders protected abusers, boards silenced whistleblowers, victims were told to forgive and forget. Trust died one hush money payout at a time. Second, the money. Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z all grew up during massive wealth inequality. They watched faith leaders get rich while Black poverty deepened. Prosperity gospel taught folks to expect miracles, but real economic justice was never on the table. When people asked for help, they got a prayer. When they asked where the money went, they got side-eyed or shown the door. These generations want transparency. They want receipts. They want to know where the offering is going and why the preacher never has to sacrifice when everyone else does. And finally, trust. Trust is earned by showing up, by living what you preach, by fighting for your people. Instead, too many religious leaders became lackeys for politicians, choosing photo ops and grant money over real advocacy. When people got shot by police, the faith leaders called for calm, not justice. When Black folks demanded reparations, the pastors said, "Wait on the Lord," but never told the politicians to cut the check, so the people walked away. Let's go even deeper. The pulpit and politics are now so tangled up that it's hard to tell the difference. These generations saw their so-called spiritual leaders turn into political lackeys, selling out in the name of the greater good while pocketing favors from the system. Gen X saw pastors endorse candidates who didn't care about Black issues, but who wrote big checks or promised a seat at the inauguration. Millennials saw churches turn into polling places, but never demand real policies for the people. Gen Z? They peeped the game from the jump, seeing pastors who courted city contracts, nonprofit grants, and party access while keeping quiet about mass incarceration, gentrification, and poverty. And let's be honest, these generations don't respect leaders who only show up during election season, who never speak on reparations, self-reliance, or the judgment of the Most High. They saw through the empty promises and realized most faith leaders are working for themselves and their patrons, not the people. The result? Millennials and Gen Z started organizing outside the church. They built movements online, in coffee shops, on campuses, and in the streets. They raised money on GoFundMe, started mutual aid groups, and created their own spaces for spiritual growth and social action. They realized you don't need a building, a pastor, or a Sunday program to have faith or to make a difference. And so the church pews got emptier, the mosque lost its energy, the temple saw more gray hair and less youthful fire. These generations learned you don't have to sit in silence and watch the hustle. You can build your own truth. So what do Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z actually want? Simple. They want real. If you're not living what you preach, if your faith doesn't show up in how you treat people, how you spend money, and how you stand up to power, you're irrelevant. They want leaders who walk the talk. They want faith spaces that are honest about sexuality, mental health, money, race, and justice. They want institutions that support single mothers, LGBTQ folks, returning citizens, and anybody else the old guard likes to shame or silence. These generations generations respect truth, even if it's ugly, over tradition for tradition's sake. They crave spaces where doubt is welcomed, questions are answered, and nobody is shamed for disagreeing with the pastor. They want receipts, accountability, and a willingness to apologize when things go wrong. They want to see their tithes and offerings used for scholarships, mutual aid, community organizing, not lining a leader's pockets or keeping a building open for nostalgia's sake. They want leaders who speak out for reparations, economic justice, and radical self-reliance, not just vague blessings and breakthroughs. Fake is out, real is in. The institutions that can't adapt will get left behind, and that's exactly what's happening. Here's the hope, AfroWire fam. All is not lost. There's a new movement rising, one that looks less like church as usual and more like a family reunion, a protest, a study group, a food drive, a support network, and a healing circle all rolled into one. Generation X, Millennials, and Generation Z are not godless. They're just allergic to lies, manipulation, and control. They crave spiritual connection, but on their terms. They want rituals that honor the ancestors, teachings that heal trauma, and leadership that earns respect. Some congregations are waking up. You see churches opening their doors for activism, housing the homeless, demanding police accountability, and pushing for reparations. You see imams talking mental health, pastors coming out and embracing LGBTQ members, and temples inviting doubters and seekers to the table. These are the spaces that are growing, not because they watered down the message, but because they made it real. For everyone else, time is up. If you're leading with ego, cashing checks, or covering up scandal, prepare for empty pews and a legacy of irrelevance. Generation X, Millennials, and Generation Z will not be fooled, bought, or shamed. They know when you're playing games, and they know when you're the real deal. To the elders clinging to control, let go, or get left behind. To the leaders who sold out for perks, status, and side pieces. The youth are not blind, and your secrets will not save you from accountability. The next wave of faith is going to be raw, transparent, and unstoppable. It'll be driven by people who know how to pray and protest, meditate and mobilize, build businesses and bail each other out. It will honor the ancestors, but refuse to make idols out of institutions. Here's Sista Samilah's advice for every faith leader still wondering why the youth are missing. Essie. Start living what you preach every day, everywhere. Give up the spotlight and create space for questions, doubt, and change. Spend less on buildings and more on people. Take a real stand on justice, reparations, and self-reliance. Even if it costs you grants, favor, or friends, make your faith radical again, because only the real will survive. That's the future, and that's what our people deserve. Family. The old ways are dying. The pews are empty, not because God failed, but because the institutions did. If you want to see Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z come back, give them a reason to believe. Not in your brand, but in the truth, the justice, and the love you claim to preach. If you're a leader, get real or get gone. If you're a seeker, don't let the hypocrisy steal your faith. Take it back and make it yours. If you're tired of the fake, build your own sacred space, your own movement, your own circle of realness. This is Sista Samilah on AfroWire AI, always speaking what's real, always calling for accountability, always pushing us toward our highest self. Don't let anyone sell you salvation while they're tricking off the tithes. Demand the real, live the real, and be the real, because that's what's going to change this generation and the world.